Serious if you could learn the truth of any one mystery, urban legend or conspiracy theory, what would you choose? My grandfather, one day, just walked out the door and never came back. This was before I was born. I'm 27. He left behind my grandmother and his 3 children. There was a statewide search. My mom's family never got closure. Although, me thinks he might have had another family that he ran away to. But it still baffles me sometimes at night. My grandmother finally held a pseudo-funeral/memorial for him last year. My grandma's brother did this in the 30s. Just disappeared. By all accounts, his wife turned very unpleasant, bordering on abusive. After marriage and divorce wasn't a good option in those days. My grandpa traveled a lot for work and supposedly ran into him in Nevada in the late 50s/early 60s. Grandpa worked on military contracts for his company, so he was all over the world until his kids were a little older. He said the guy would never admit it was him. But the bar the guy was running was named after him. His nickname had been Big Ed and the bar was named Big Ed's. It looked like him. And the guy knew a lot about their mutual hometown Chicago. Supposedly the guy specifically asked him to say hello to my grandma and her sister. My grandpa hadn't mentioned a sister. I keep trying to find record of this bar, but no luck, never got a name on the town. No idea if the story was true or if my grandpa was trying to help my grandma get closure, though he wasn't the type to lie. I wanna know if they kept going at it with the MK Ultra thing and how they do it now if it is. I gotta go with the first ever unsolved mystery that really made me think. Mystery of the Somerton Man. In the 1948 a guy was found dead on a beach in Adelaide, Australia. He was never identified and months after finding his body they found a fake pocket in his pants. It was torn from a copy of the book Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. I googled that and had a phrase on it which said Tamam shud, which means ended or finished in Persian. They found the book that it came from, but the owner denied ever knowing the guy. There was an encrypted message in the book that they found and it still hasn't been cracked. Apparently there's been a development recently that might identify him as H.C. Reynolds, but it's not 100% certain. It's super interesting. Undefined. Where is the nearest alien civilization? When my grandmother was actively dying, she gasped and said, "Bill, my grandfather who had already passed is here and he brought a black lady." Then she died. All of us there were looking at each other like WTF? My dad did this kind of thing too. He was in a lot of pain and very distressed. Then suddenly turned to us and said, "My mum is here. She wants me to die now." Smiled to himself and reached out like he was hugging someone and died peacefully. Honestly, it was the biggest relief knowing he was comforted and happy in those last few seconds. He'd always been a mummy's boy and never got over her passing. These stories are really comforting to me. My mother had a stroke and died a few days later. Because of the stroke, she was having memory problems and didn't know why she was in the hospital. This was in June of 2020 and we couldn't visit during COVID. I'd call a few times a day to remind her why she was in the hospital. Tell her I love her and can't wait for her to get home. And remind her we weren't allowed to visit but are thinking of her. Anyways, I carry a lot of guilt that we couldn't visit and that she was confused when she passed. She was greeted by a loved one. I would be so relieved. Edit to add. Thanks to everyone for all the love and support. I know that what Reddit does. But I wasn't expecting it from an off-the-cuff remark about how much reading these experiences comfort me. Except to the asshole who'd met me that I'm a terrible daughter. I hope that waste of skin with an internet connection stubs his little toe tonight getting into bed. I have no idea if there's an afterlife. But my mom was very much a believer in Jesus. And not a hypocritical treat people like speak but go to church on Sunday Christian. She absolutely treated everyone she met with kindness, respect and love. So I've said ever since she passed that if there is a heaven, she's 100% there. I want either know what happened to MH370 or D.B. Cooper. I really believe Cooper landed safely and knew the FBI would not be far behind. He buried the money intending to retrieve it later. The police randomly searched the area as new leads came in. It was years before he felt it was safe to retrieve the money. By then he couldn't remember exactly where it was since the darkness when he landed obscured most landmarks. Did you see the story on r/Nasleep claiming to be Cooper? Link me. I'm off tomorrow and don't need to sleep. It's not particularly scary or frightening, just very interesting. The Korovina Group, I think that's the name. Basically a group of 7 hikers start hiking the mountains when 6 of them start bleeding from the eyes, ears, nose and mouth. They all scream, start seizing. One even starts bashing their head on a rock. The remaining survivor flees, but later comes back to the bodies to get supplies. She's found a few days later but refused to talk about it. A lot of people say it's a deadly nerve agent that Russia was using. This happened in Siberia, I think, but that doesn't explain why the last one survived, even going back and still being unaffected. Sounds an awful lot like radiation burns and sickness. I know some other people died in Russia after straying too close to an abandoned RTG once used to power a radio relay out in the wilds. The Panama Papers. Loads of wealthy people involved and murders attached to it also. You should know there are loads of other equally large tax avoidance schemes that have floated around since basically forever. Panama was the one that leaked, but there are so many others. Where are the aliens? Tell me. The Yuba County 5 young mentally handicapped men went missing. They were gone for months without any clues other than a few mysterious phone calls saying not to look for them. Their vehicle was found up on a mountain road a few days after they went missing. It turned on and ran perfectly fine. They were finally found in a trailer deep in the mountains. The strange thing was the one full corpse that was found starved and froze to death when there was plenty of food, water and heat in the trailer to last all 5 boys a year. Some of the food had been eaten, showing that they hadn't had a problem accessing the food. While they did have impairments, they were all independent and would have known how to turn on the heat and get food. Call for help. To add the mystery, RHE 5th man's body was never found, and while the others were cognitively impaired, he suffered from schizophrenia and had several disturbing incidents leading up to their disappearance. The full corpse that Kaz found was wearing this man's shoes, but wasn't him. The corpse had been wearing boots the night they disappeared, and it's believed that the man either stole them or talked the other young man into giving him his boots. What happens to the 5th man? Why did the man in the trailer starve to death surrounded by food? Why did the other men leave the trailer and die just hundreds of feet away from it when there was food and warmth so close? Why did they leave the car to begin with? Why didn't they follow the trail back to the road? Now I'm wondering about this, and I've never heard this story before. Undefined. A man only a year older than me went missing in my town, right near my place of work a few years ago. He just disappeared. I remember seeing the missing posters and the police conducting searches. It has been several years and he is still listed as missing. I think about him from time to time and wonder whatever happened to him. I'd want to know about him. There are so many cases like his. I hope his family and the other families one day get answers. Similar story in my town here in the UK. Guy just disappeared on the way home from the pub in early evening in the summer when it was still light out. They scoured CCTV in the area and tried to track his last movements but never found him. This is why I think it's a bit ridiculous when you see the tinfoil hat nut jobs claiming that the government are tracking you. They couldn't even find a guy who went missing on his way home in broad daylight through a city center filled with CCTV and carrying his phone. Harold Holt, Australian Prime Minister in the 1960s, disappeared while swimming at the beach. He was never found. Always love the fact that there is a pool in suburban Melbourne called the Harold Holt Memorial Swimming Pool. The bloke drowned for beep's sake and they named a pool after him. Now that is the kind of dry comedy I can get behind. What was before our universe? I probably wouldn't understand the answer though. Is there treasure on Oak Island? The real treasure of Oak Island is the Friends and the multi-million-dollar TV franchise we created along the way. This right here. The company behind the TV franchise probably doesn't care much about the treasure because they've already made more off the mystery than the treasure itself is likely worth. Jennifer Fairgate/Fergate. It's a fascinating mystery. A woman checks into the Oslo Plaza Hotel, a 5-star establishment, and is found dead in her room 3 days later. Initially assumed to have committed a suicide. But there's no blood on her hands. No gunshot residue. No fingerprints on the bullets in the gun or the gun itself. Which, in addition to the odd position in which she is found on her bed, really starts looking more like homicide. Additionally, no personal belongings in the room besides clothes, shoes, a travel bag and an attach full of bullets. Clothes and shoes have all producer labels/designations removed as well. Contents of her stomach indicate that she had died the day before she was found. But a member of staff who knocked on her door heard a gunshot go off right after that, indicating someone's presence inside. The door was also locked from the inside, but no one was there when they got in. Probably my favorite true crime thing. The second batch of Unsolved Mysteries on Netflix has an episode on this. Who wrote the Voynich manuscript and why? And why was it written encoded or in an unknown language? I like learning about weird mysteries in history, and this is one that remains unsolved to this day despite quite extensive research through the centuries. The fact it hasn't been decoded makes me think it's just an elaborate hoax or art project and is just gibberish. That's tough. Jack the Ripper and Andrew Gosden interest me. But I'd pick the Atlas Vampire. Where's all the missing indigenous women from the Highway of Tears and other areas? Somebody must f***ing know. My hands go up to you for bringing this up. I highly recommend supporting the Moose Hide campaign, whose mission is to end violence against indigenous women and children. Assuming he died, are we allowed to learn 2 truths about one mystery? Where did most of D.B. Cooper's ransom money end up after he jumped from that airplane? I believe the FBI lets you keep it if you find it, as long as you give them a chance to analyze it for latent prints/DNA first. Those bills must be worth a fortune to a collector. Even if they aren't, I'll still get tens of thousands of dollars in cash. Who doesn't want that? So, I get my name in the papers for finding Cooper's money. And I get a nice chunk of change to keep. A double whammy of good fortune. The True Age of the Sphinx. And its original look. Not sure if this counts. But I really want a family tree of all living creatures from the beginning of life to now. From the first life form to every human being alive right now. It would be too large to print it. Maybe a very large PNG file in a godlike flash drive with infinite storage. Who killed Libby and Abby in Delphi, Indiana in February 2017? This story absolutely makes me sick. Most unresolved mysteries involving children do. But this one has always stuck with me. It happened so recently, and there's just no way the sick creep just got away with it. Especially with modern technology. The girls' families are still actively doing as much as they can to work towards some closure. One of the girls has a sister who's very outspoken and has done a lot of work towards solving this crime, and I absolutely commend her for her bravery. I pray that this case is solved someday. The JFK assassination. His head just did that. My new favorite answer. The Curse of Oak Island, so my husband will stop watching it. So many rabbit holes to go down. What did they find in Roswell, New Mexico in 1947? Who killed John Bennett Ramsey? Who was the Zodiac Killer? What happened to Walter Collins? Who killed the Black Dahlia? Where or what happened to Flight 370? And these are just the top of my head. If I had a chance to sit and think, I'd have a lot more. Who was Jack the Ripper? It seems like it was most likely some angry deranged dude from the local area who was eventually arrested for something else. Or otherwise put away or injured/killed. I feel like if we had a way of magically learning who he was, it would just be some random name we hadn't heard of. Yes. Scotland Yard found a man who couldn't take care of himself in the streets of Whitechapel. Shortly after Mary Kelly's murder. The man was completely incoherent and was sent to a sanitarium where his mad violence required constant restraints. He died of exhaustion from mania the following year. Right. For anyone wanting to look deeper into this possibility, this suspect's name is recorded as David Cohen, though Cohen supposedly may be a John Doe type substitution for a difficult to pronounce foreign Jewish name. I would want to learn the truth around the Mothman and what people were seeing in the days leading up to the bridge collapse. There is this famous case in France where a bourgeois family was killed. Except the father, who disappeared. He is of course the prime suspect. As the events they have reconstructed suggest, he got the oldest son back home himself to kill him after the other family members has already been murdered. He buried them all under the terrace and they weren't found right away. So he got a head start, so to say. It's been years and no one knows what happened to him. There have been plenty of sightings all over the country. But he looks very average and forgettable. A few years back, they thought they got him on a flight in from Scotland, and didn't show his picture until a few days later. And everyone who knows about the case wondered WTF was the police thinking. Because the man who was arrested looks nothing like him. Anyway, I'd like to know what happened to him and if he really did it. I have little doubt he did. But he went to such length to cover his tracks, sending letters to family members saying he and his family were relocating under witness protection in the US. Or suggesting he was involved in a big case and couldn't disclose his location, etc. Some people even believed the people buried in his yard were not his real family but morgue corpses with elements of DNA to link it to the family so they could escape/fake their death. Netflix did an episode on it in their remastered Unsolved Mysteries Season 1 if you want to know more about the case. It's really interesting.